All right, so you've looked at the plants in your yard. If you have the opportunity and the resources, go out and collect a sample. Collect a couple different samples from different varieties. Take a pair of scissors or a knife, just be careful, obviously, and cut a piece off. Cut a piece off from different parts of the plant. So if you have a tree in the yard, cut a leaf, cut a branch. If you have something where you can get to the root system, pull up a little piece of the root system. Depending on how excited you are about plants, dig up one. Let's explore this stuff. Remember, plants are important. They are the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems. Without plants, we're dead. We need them more than they need us. So the more we can understand them, the more we can help them survive and grow and persist, which means a benefit to the human population and the human species. Okay, so you got a sample of a plant in your hand, hopefully. Okay, and remember, you can pause this lecture at any point, go collect something, bring it back in, and keep listening to the lecture and working on the content. So, all right, so if you have that cross section, one of the first tissues I want us to look at is the ground tissue. All right, so ground tissues. There are 3 types of ground tissue out there. 3 different cell types that fit within ground tissue. So ground tissue is a big category. Within it, we're going to have type 1, type 2, and type 3. Now, each of these types are going to have a different purpose, a different function. We'll see them in different levels and concentrations. It just varies based on the plant type and then also what type of plant we're working with here within the vascular flowering plants. Okay, so the first one we're going to tackle, number 1, is parenchyma. So let me put the number 1 here. So parenchyma tissues. Parenchyma tissue, let me give you some facts about it here. Get in your text box. This is actually, oh, there it is, going to be the most common tissue type within the vascular flowering plants. So a great example, if you guys have an apple, take a bite, that soft, juicy part that we eat, that's parenchyma tissue. So when we look at it, one of the main functions of parenchyma tissue is storage. Now, they'll store all sorts of stuff, things like starch, different oils, water, salt. I'm just going to put a little etc. here. Right, so lots and lots of different stuff can be found in the parenchyma tissue. Parenchyma tissue is also important for photosynthesis. So you think about all those little green chloroplasts that run photosynthesis, that tends to be located in the parenchyma tissue. And they produce a variety of secretions. Different things called resin, tannins, hormones, and different enzymes. All these products come from parenchyma tissue. Now again, this can be found in the root system, this can be found in the stems, in the leaves, in the fruits, etc. But very, very common tissue type. So whether it's an apple or the picture here is a potato, so if you guys remember staining a potato with iodine or Lugol's, the starch turns black. That black tells us there's a lot of stored starch there. One of the questions earlier in the semester, why do plants store starch in their root system? So parenchyma tissue is in the root system because that triggers osmosis. If you have this big molecule of starch inside your root cell, water moves into the root cell because of osmosis. So while they're storing these things, it also triggers things like osmosis within the plant system. Okay, so very important tissue group or tissue type within the vascular plants. Again, remember, parenchyma is a type of ground tissue. So, all right, so number one in your favorite list of plant tissue types. So here's number two. Number two is going to be the Collenchyma tissue. Let me make these guys smaller. All right, so Collenchyma tissue. This is a type of ground tissue. Okay, so number two in the ground tissue category. And when we look at it, Collenchyma tissue is very good at providing some flexible structural support. So if you guys have eaten a piece of celery and you bite in and you're trying to just crunch through that real tough fibrous stuff and there's kind of that stringy stuff in the celery stalk, that's Collenchyma tissue. So celery is what we would call an herbaceous plant. If you grew celery, it would die off every year. And then you have to grow it again and it dies off. But in order for that celery stalk to get, 14, 16, 18 inches tall, it needs some supportive tissue. That's what the Collenchyma does for the celery and other plants as well, and other parts of the plant, is it gives it this flexible structural support. Often we'll see cellulose embedded within the cell wall, which gives it a rigid, makes the cells pretty rigid, and then the tissue's pretty solid and it's called rigid structural support there. Most species can't break down the cellulose. Humans can't. So we use it as roughage, fiber. But think about other species that can digest cellulose. We talked about fungi. They can break down Collenchyma tissue to help recycle the nutrients that are trapped or contained within that part of the plant cells or the plant body. So again, this is why fungi are such an important group within any ecosystem, especially terrestrial ecosystems. Okay, so that would be our number two tissue type within the ground tissue category. And then number three, our third tissue type here. This is going to be what we call Sclerenchyma. So Sclerenchyma tissue, I gotta remove. So if you guys have a pear, grab one. If you have peanuts, start cracking open some of those guys. Sclerenchyma tissue is a very, very specialized tissue type found within different plant cells. Primary role is to provide support. It can also provide some level of protection. It's going to be a very hard type of tissue here. So these little red star-like things down here, these are Sclerenchyma tissues. They're what we call sclerids. It's a specialized type of Sclerenchyma tissue. So sclerids, let's see if make sure I get that spelling right. It's not going to do it. The sclerids, let me get the spelling right. E-I-S. There we go. Sclerids. Sorry about that. So sclerids make the gritty texture in pears. So if you guys have eaten a pear and you bite down, and as you're chewing on the pear, you notice it's kind of gritty. It almost feels like there's little pieces of sand in it. Those are the sclerids that you're chewing on. Peanuts, the shell in the peanut. Don't eat the shell. Not a good idea. We are not going to digest it and break it down. So definitely not a digestible material by our digestive system. Other animals, hey, if they can do it, good for them. But most mammals, humans included, we're not digesting the sclerids. So it does provide fiber, but I would be very cautious about peanut shells. Not a good idea. So again, sclerids are a specialized Sclerenchyma tissue type. The other type of Sclerenchyma tissue are fibers. So little fibrous tissues. This is what makes up wood. So these are all little wood fibers here. It also helps make up the leaf rib, giving structural support to leaves. Take a piece of wood, you chop it in half or split it, and you see all those little fibers. That's all going to be composed of Sclerenchyma tissue. So ground tissue has 3 categories within it. Make sure you guys are comfortable. Within ground tissue, we have the the parenchyma, the collenchyma, and the sclerenchyma. Those are your 3 that sit underneath the ground tissue category. So here are the let me put that up here, fibers. Oops. So, all right, so just one last thing to mention here. When we look at the cell wall of plants, this obviously varies from plant type to plant type, but a very generalized picture. When we're looking at the cell wall, why do plants have this rigid structural nature to them? Because of the different fibers that are embedded within their cell wall. So we have a lot of that, those sclerenchyma tissue, fiber tissues embedded here in the cell wall to give it rigid structural support. So if you're a herbaceous plant and you die off every year, not nearly as much cellulose embedded into your cell wall. If you're a woody plant, you got a little bit higher level of cellulose embedded in there because you have to last year after year after year after year. Very different game for those types of plants. But some of the primary components of the cell wall, this hopefully sounds familiar. Let me make that a little smaller. Cellulose. Oh, sorry, wrong one there. And lignin. Those are 2 of the primary fiber types that we'll see embedded within the cell wall. So when that plant dies, think about the fungi and how they produce enzymes to digest cellulose and lignin. They produce that cellulase and lignase enzymes. They're the 2 primary digestive enzymes produced by fungi, the non-parasitic ones, that are breaking down plants. So they're recycling those plant materials for us year after year after year. So, okay, all right, so good point to pause, a little early, but we're going to pause it here. And then as we come back for the next part, we will take a look at and start talking about vascular tissue. So again, if you have a plant, piece of a plant, cut a cross section of it, especially if you have a thick stem. And let's take a look at the internal organization of that stem. If you guys have a magnifying glass or even your camera on your phone, you can zoom in and magnify a little bit. Take a look at it. Let's look for some of these different tissue types.